Welcome back, guys. Welcome to another video. Today we're going to be discussing the topic of stretching on resistance training. And what we will be covering is what impact does stretching have on resistance training? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? In what context? So by the end of the video, you should have a scientific, a researched understanding of how stretching impacts your performance when it comes to strength training in the gym, or if you're talking about resistance training in other facets like body weight training, or if you're talking even about sprinting or high interval training. So there are a bunch of different avenues where resistance training can be impacted by stretching. And also, on top of that, not only will we understand the research, we will also understand possible physiological mechanisms for the conclusion that we will be reaching. Okay, so, and of course there is a menu system linked below in the description box for you mobile users, as well as a menu system, that's for anybody that wants to skip to various parts of the video. First things first, what type of stretching are we talking about? We are talking about specifically, or most of the research that we're going to be talking about is related to static stretching. So the kind of typical stretching that you think of, if you maybe hold a position for like 15 seconds, slight discomfort, but you're not getting a bunch of movement, you're just kind of stretching it out for about 15 seconds, then releasing, then stretching it out for another 15 seconds, and you do that through various body parts. So that's static stretching, and there are various methods of stretching, but static stretching is probably the most common, and that's what most people end up doing before their workouts or whatever. So that's what we're going to be covering. Now, the big question: does stretching have an impact on resistance training? Yes, there's a good reason why a lot of people, or we've had this recommendation of people stretching before they work out. And stretching, of course, has an impact on resistance training of all different facets, of all different styles. However, the research is rather conflicted on the effectiveness of stretching. Should it be used before a workout, for example? And actually the research seems to indicate in certain instances, no, you should not stretch before a workout. And other research seems to indicate that stretching is a beneficial thing, that you should be doing that. Now, the distinction between those two ideas is the methodology by which these research papers ended up going about investigating stretching. And it's more about a timetable. So if you stretch before a workout, so right, like let's say 30 minutes or 10 minutes before you start weightlifting, in that case, stretching will actually have a detrimental impact on your weightlifting endeavors. You will actually only be able to produce less power through your weightlifting endeavor if you stretch beforehand or during your exercising. However, other research that has looked at stretching outside of the context of weightlifting, so you're still exercising via weightlifting, but you do stretching. Maybe if you weightlift on a Monday, you would stretch maybe on a Tuesday, or you would stretch later on a Monday, or you would stretch another part of the day. In those cases, stretching seems to have a beneficial impact on resistance training. It seems like people are able to produce more power out of, and seem to grow more out of stretching as well as weightlifting. But so the idea is that, again, we're not stretching before weightlifting because that is detrimental. However, if we stretch after weightlifting, or if we stretch at a different day or different time, then in that case it would be beneficial to stretch. And now that we understand that, we can maybe understand a little bit about the physiology of why that might be the case. So let's go ahead and delve into that. Alright, so as far as the physiology, none of this has 100% been proven. This is more of just a series of ideas that a lot of really intelligent people that are studying this have come up with, and the little bit of research that has been done in this direction to try and elucidate some of these mechanisms seems to point in these directions. So I'm not saying this is 100% correct, I'm just saying that this is what the current scientific evidence seems to point towards and what the scientific community seems to point towards. So one thing is a negative for why stretching right before exercising, or right before, I should say, resistance training specifically, might be a bad thing, would be because a stiffer muscle and a stiffer tendon seem to produce more force, or are able to produce more force. So that said, if you then stretch out that musculature and stretch out those tendons, then you're going to have a decrease in force production capabilities. That is one of the theories. Another theory is on the neural component, that we have a depression in the neural impact, the neural communication abilities between, again, that central nervous system, that peripheral nervous system, and the musculature. So we have a depression in that, leading to a decrease in force production, a decrease in the ability to resist against a particular object like a barbell. So those are the negatives. That's why an acute bout of static stretching would be not recommended, and the reasoning why would be because of that mechanical and that neural understanding of physiology. Now, on the other hand, the positives why stretching outside of your resistance training or stretching after your resistance training can come down to multiple different components, but we'll cover a few of them. One of them is certainly that after you exercise, it's certainly beneficial to then stretch out. I mean, you're done with your resistance training, so it's not going to impede your resistance training. If afterwards you want to stretch for 10-15 minutes, then that could actually also keep your muscles warmer, so keep that blood going in there, kind of starting that healing process so you could speed up recovery. That is a possibility. That's not just after exercise, however. That could also be the next day. You know, getting some movement, really any movement, but specifically if we're talking about stretching, stretching is movement. You're getting that kind of discomfort, getting that movement. You're going from being in a very static position and you're kind of stretching things out. You're moving through your different motions, getting through those levels of soreness. So that's a possibility that it's aiding in recovery. Now, after training, it's also possible that it adds a kind of hypertrophic effect. It might add a little bit more muscular damage than what you just did in solely resistance training, and therefore, because you have a slight increase in muscular damage, then you might have a slight increase in muscular adaptation. So those are two of the possibilities for why static stretching could have a positive impact on your strength endeavors when it comes to resistance training. Okay. This is the summary of the video for those of you that need a quick recap. If not, please subscribe and check out the attached article. Okay, in the summary section. Alright, what did we talk about? We talked about static stretching specifically, although this would probably apply to anything that's like static stretching. And we talked about how static stretching does have an impact on resistance training. In certain aspects it has a negative impact, and in other aspects it has a positive impact. And then we kind of made sense of that. So, should you stretch right before a resistance training time period? No, you should not, because it seems that the research does indicate a reduced force production from the musculature due to most likely due to static stretching before training or even during training. It is not recommended to stretch. You can, however, and I didn't really mention this throughout the entire video, but you can use dynamic stretching, which is more of a dynamic workout warm-up, going through the actual motions, going through the actual lift that you're about to prepare for. So in that case, yes, you can do dynamic stretching, but you should avoid static stretching. On the other hand, when it came to static stretching in general, independent of resistance training, so you're still doing resistance training, but you're doing your stretching after you do your resistance training, or you're doing your stretching on another day that you're not doing resistance training, in that case, there is a benefit to static stretching. So the recommendation will most likely be to go ahead and do your static stretching, but do it post-training or do it on a separate day other than your training days. So the reasons why are because, well, again, they're not completely elucidated, but the research and the scientific community seems to be pointing towards the idea that a tensor muscle, an unstretched muscle prior to lifting, can produce more force than a stretched muscle and tendon. So really that tendon muscle connection. On another note, of course, the neural connection is also a possibility. A depressed neural connection, a depressed neural communication ability between the nervous system and the musculature could also be a reason, a compounded reason, or maybe an isolated reason as to why we have a decrease in force production from the stretching before or during resistance training. On the other hand, on the good note, it is also possible that stretching also allows for just a little bit more damage of that musculature post-training to a point where your body has to eventually attenuate that, and then you see a little bit greater strength gains or a little bit greater hypertrophy. Well, muscle growth, if you're not familiar with that term. On the other hand, it's also possible that stretching, just because you're going through the movements, that you're able to warm up the muscle and kind of get more blood flow through that region, which would help in recovery. So that is the video. That's what I've got to say. Of course, I have far more details, and I've got all my sources, all my scientifically backed, peer-reviewed research that is linked in the article below. If you found the information useful to you, please subscribe. It certainly means quite a bit to me when I see that subscription number increase. And if you know of anybody that does end up stretching before they exercise, it might be a good idea to go ahead and share this video with them. All right, and without further ado, I will see you in the next video. Have a good one.